just to help us out in the future. And as I said, are you registered to vote? This is something that we'll ask you at the end as well.
Plug in the Apple TV, please.
And if, there we go. We're going to be talking today about what keeps you up at night. We're going to be looking at some of those issues that do make our lives difficult. They made them difficult before COVID-19. They certainly make them difficult now. And why these are also imperative. It's imperative that we vote in order to address these. And I'm Rev Joan Van Becelaere, and I am the Director of Unitarian Universalist Justice Ohio. And Susan, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Rev Susan Smith, and I'm the founder of Crazy Faith Ministries in Columbus, Ohio. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hi.
A little centering to start us with. Howard Thurman said, "Do not be silent, for there is no limit to the power that may be released through you." And with that, we'll light our virtual chalice this morning as we begin. Okay, why are we here this morning? We're going to talk about what keeps us up at night. We're going to talk about the reality of voter suppression in Ohio, but in other states as well. We're going to have you check your registration status at the end. And if there's questions, we can help with that. We're going to talk this morning because what we want to do is increase voter turnout and ensure safe and fair elections. And then we're going to ask you to be a volunteer, to be a voter advocate, to help educate and register and support the voter turnout, even during a pandemic, for those safe and fair elections. So that's what we're going to be doing this morning. And let's go through here. I'll call on you from what I can see, and then you just tell your name and where you live, since we got some folk from different places. Charles, if we want to start with you.
He's muted.
You're muted, Charles. I'll unmute you. There you go.
He's still muted.
Okay. Then let's start with Pat.
My name is Pat Smart. I live in Mason, Ohio, which is just north of Cincinnati.
Great.
I'm a member of First Church Cincinnati.
Great. Charles, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Okay. Charles Spencer from St. John's Unitarian Universalist in Cincinnati.
Great. And Megan?
Megan Essler from Portland, Oregon, and I go to West Hills Unitarian Universalist Fellowship.
All righty. And Linda Smith.
I am Linda Smith. I'm also from Portland, Oregon, and I also go to West Hills Union Fellowship.
Okay. And John?
I'm John Kachuba from St. John's in Cincinnati, and also a board member of UUJO.
And then Mike.
Mike Steiner. I go to St. John's in Cincinnati, and I know John Kachuba and Charles and others, and Lucy's here too.
All righty.
Yeah, okay.
And then Marie.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I am also from St. John's in Cincinnati.
Okay, Marie. And Carol?
Hi, Joan, this is Carol. I'm here in Cincinnati in Wyoming, Ohio, and I'm working with John and Linda out in Oregon, and Ralph Whaley's here with me also.
That's wonderful. And then Howard. It's good to see you.
Yes, I am in Tucson, Arizona at the moment. It's breakfast time, so I've put a photo up so you won't see me eating. I'm a member of St. John's, and after listening to Governor DeWine's Thursday briefing, decided I'm going to make a run for it and try to head back to Cincinnati in another 3 weeks, driving back.
Oh. Okay. And then Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary Newman from St. John's in Cincinnati.
Perfect. All right. Thank you all for being here. Absolutely wonderful. Susan.
We, first of all, I want to add my welcome to you guys, and really impressed with the people who are, can you hear me? Because somebody said my volume seemed low. Am I okay?
You're fine.
You're
okay,
good.
I want to thank you for coming in, people in the West Coast and almost the West Coast in Arizona. Thank you for doing this. We appreciate it. This is a critical time. And I think it's a critical time for a number of reasons, but most of all because the need for us to vote is imperative. Now, we always talk about voting as being, I have always thought about voting as being a right of Americans and something that couldn't be tampered with, which of course is stupid because it's always been tampered with, but it's being tampered with even more now. And because of that, because of the history of our votes being bothered and a number of other things, people are sometimes reluctant to vote, and now is not the time to be reluctant. Now is not the time to do it. There are reasons we don't vote, including we don't believe our vote will count. One vote can make a difference. One vote can make a difference. We have not registered, or our registration is incorrect. We'll talk a little bit about how very, very meticulous people in the boards of election are being because of the political concerns that are going on to make sure everything on your voter registration form is what they have, and how they are turning people away from the polls for the slightest little changes. So we're going to go over that. And we don't believe in the system. We don't believe in the system. So there are a number of reasons why voting is important. Next slide, Joan. Next slide. But voting is our right, and we have to take it. We have to take the bull by the horn. Somebody told me yesterday, said, I don't think I'm going to vote because, for the normal reasons, it's not going to make a difference. And this person said, and even if we vote like the president, because all this person was thinking about was the president. Even if we vote the president out, the president is never going to leave office peacefully. And my response was, well, we don't know what's going to happen, but what I do know is that the vote is necessary. And we have to also understand that all voting is local. Elections are local. So we could get the president out, but if we don't, or if we don't get the right people in office on a local level, we haven't done anything at all. So I'm trying to get people to understand how important voting is on a number of levels. Federal, yes, but local, state, and local elections are critical. So we need to be aware of judges, the prosecutors and city attorneys, the council persons, state lawmakers, and the school levies are very, very important. And I know that you have all been keeping up with what the effort has been to stack the courts with judges on the federal level. So it's really important that we get people in on the local level in terms of the judges that affects all of our lives. So we want people to think, I want you to think, if you don't think anything else, just keep thinking that all politics is local, and we absolutely have to vote on a local level. We just have to, I want you to say it, walk around and say it and chant it, because it is vital that we get people in who are going to protect the interests of the masses and not just of a few. I'm reading this book called, you can't see the title, it's called The Power Worshipper. And it's an excellent book, and I think everybody should read it because it talks about this movement of Christian nationalism, and it talks about how the purpose of Christian nationalists is to create a so-called theocracy, but it's a very particular type of theocracy they're talking about, a certain type of Protestantism, which is not based on the love of God or the following of God or Jesus the Christ, but on the love of money and power. It is a fascinating book, and one of the things that she talks about in this book is how the courts are stacked, how this movement has worked. And they've been strategizing for a number of years to stack the courts with judges that are going to protect their interests. So I think that we have to broaden what we think and everything that we know so that we'll have a more informed base and a more informed knowledge base of why that this push to vote is so important. So the problem, and then I wrestled with this with, I talked about this with Joan some time ago. What keeps you up at night? Now I know, and I'm going to just be quiet in a couple of minutes because I want you guys to tell us what keeps you up at night. But I don't know about you, but I know that in my life, things that keep me up at night include, money problems. How am I going to pay the bills? If I have a family member who is sick and he or she doesn't have health care, how are we going to take care of them? I worry about how I think our democracy is being, suctioned or siphoned down the tubes. I worry about a lot of different things. And I don't know about you, but I can be in a dead sleep and then my eyes will pop open and just think about things that really bother me. So we want to take a couple of seconds, and Jonah can just call people by name, but ask you what keeps you up at night. And what I will do is record what you say, because what we want to do is compile like a running list that we share with the people across the country, especially in the state of Ohio, that we are sharing this particular webinar with. So just anybody start, maybe Megan, start with telling us what keeps you up at night.
Why don't you be part of this?
What bothers me a lot is income inequality. It just, I can't believe how it's gotten worse and worse and worse, and seems no signs of stopping. So that's my biggie.
Mm-hmm. And you can type in the chat box if you don't want to speak up, but next, just raise your hand or unmute yourself. Yeah, Dot.
I think I'm unmuted. Am I unmuted?
Yeah, Dot, you're fine.
I really am concerned about the basic housing and the level of homelessness and the lack of food for so many people, but particularly for children. The children in poverty is what makes me sick.
Okay. Another?
So my concern is a little bit different. It's not so issue specific as much as I'm just concerned with sort of the dumbing down of America. It seems like half the population, I hate to say it, but they seem ignorant. And that's on all issues. It affects all issues. Somehow we're getting, this fake news, fake media, and I'm putting that in quotes because I don't believe it's fake, but a lot of people do. And I don't know how to get through to the half of America that is living in myth and fable and, conspiracy theories and deep state theories, because all that affects issues and how they vote and how they see issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Next one. Go ahead, John. Other John.
Oh, me? Okay, great. Well, I'm real concerned about voter suppression. I think it all starts with that, and I certainly resonate with all of the other things that I've heard so far this morning as well. But voter suppression is a big one for me.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Other person. Yeah, Pat.
I'm very concerned about the dismantling of our government.
Yeah.
Starts at the top where people are leaving in droves and the government cannot function as it should, as we're seeing with this virus. It's very disheartening, and I hate to think of the world I'm leaving for my children and grandchildren.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm concerned about the partisanship on the Supreme Court. The Wisconsin decision was really so a source of despair for me about the court.
Sure. Thanks, Howard.
For me, it's the greed. I just don't understand why people want so much money and power once they've got some money and power. I don't understand the obsession with that.
Thanks, Mary.
I'm concerned with our immigrant population, both documented and undocumented, and how we're treating them less and less humanely every month and every year.
Thank you, Linda. Mike, you've had something?
Well, I'm concerned about rampant inequality and, the absent terrible health care that we have in this country. We're just way behind every other advanced country in the world, and the possibility of true fascism coming.
Thanks, Mike. Another?
I worry about how all of the things that we see in society, whether it's the healthcare or the people feel like their wages are getting lost, that's being blamed on people who don't have the power. The people who have the power are getting off scot-free, and the people who don't have the power are somehow supposedly guilty of, wanting to be able to feed their families. And it's just, that's absurd and horrific.
Thanks, Carol. That's a big one. Jean, did you have something you were trying to say too?
Yes, I'm just concerned for all those people who are forcibly confined in the prisons, in the home, and of course in the detention center, and also in our retirement communities. So I think it's things are breaking out there, and I worry about that. I don't think doesn't seem to be a lot of control.
Thanks, Jean. Charles?
Yes. First, I'll say I have hearing loss, and I know at least one person on this, other person on this call could use some help also. So if you all could speak a little slower, that would be great.
Okay.
My big worry is, in a way, all of the things people have mentioned, but in the past 40 years, there's been this gradual process of filling in bricks that are creating barriers to democracy. Local elections, the right wing was very effective long ago, training people, funding, organizing to get people running for office that would follow their orders, from judges to prosecutors to state legislatures, the whole business. And then the other things that are mentioned about the current situation where facts, speaking the truth, are just being questioned, and why do we need all that? So given that, for the past several decades, I've felt like I found out what had happened way too late. So naturally, what I'm up late worrying about is what is it that we don't know about? And that's where my faith comes in, because the lilies of the field, they spin not. We just have to keep working. And we're going to find out what's going on that we don't know about. But I'm scared of a coup has already happened in a way. So the enormity of this is tremendous. So Stacey Abrams was the one way back when she decided not to run for president, who said, I'm dedicating myself to, protecting the vote. So that's one thing. I can't do much, but that's one thing I can do. And so I'm ready to take orders.
Bless you. And Erna says, she writes that she doesn't have video or microphone, so she's just listening, but she agrees with John about the voter suppression issue. So thank you, Erna.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you, because, gosh, all of that. I mean, imagine if you wake up in the middle of the night and you got all of that on your mind, one shape, way, or form, because all of it is really, really critical. Next slide, Joan. So you mentioned some of the things that are bothering you: Medicaid, homelessness, I don't know, the people in the nursing homes, the reports of people at this point. I think it has been a common thing that more people in senior citizens' homes have died and we haven't gotten word of it, but now it's even worse. And the reports of people in senior citizens' homes who are just there and their bodies are stacked up. It does something to me. What it does, the reason it keeps me up at night is because it is destroying my very naive, idealistic image of America that I grew up with. You know, this whole thing about American exceptionalism and the whole thing that this is the land of the free and the home of the brave. I felt and I had confidence in that image. And I no longer have confidence in that. And so when I think about all these things, somebody said that they're worried about, let me give you your exact word you said, true fascism, the eruption or the development of true fascism. I am very concerned about that. And I keep wondering, where are we the people? Where are we the people? The last vestige of stuff that we have are the words in the Constitution that says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. The power, according to the Constitution, rests with us. And so it kind of, it's incumbent upon us, the people, to take hold of the narrative and take hold of the problems and make sure that our democracy doesn't fall into a fascism. But so many of us, I think, are disillusioned, which is why this push to get people to, number one, believe in our democracy, and to believe in the power of the vote is so critical. So that's why this call is so important. I think that we have to, next slide, Joan, I think that we have to really talk to ourselves and encourage ourselves. And the Black church is a song that says, encourage yourself, encourage yourself. And sometimes that's all you can do, because you cannot depend on the state or the city or the governor or anybody. You have to encourage yourself. And so, so I say that in spite of some of these facts, some of these statistics that we run up against that are real. In Ohio, and for the people in Oregon and Arizona, we would appreciate if you could forward us some of your statistics as well, because we want to do like a report. We want to do like a running report that we can so that we can have conversations with people as many places as possible. But in Ohio, 41% of all of us are poor or low income, and that accounts to 4.7 million residents, including 51% of children, which is 1.4 million kids, 43% of women, 61% of people of color, and 36% of white people. I know that you have all been listening to the reports about how with this COVID-19, a disproportionate number of Black people are dying from, and it's because of the poverty that is more rampant in communities of color. It's because of no health care or horrible health care or, shyster health care that people have. So that's an issue. We have to all think about that. And this is what the other thing I need for people to understand, because I think if we as human beings, when we are away from misery, we don't really think about misery. We only think about misery in a personal way when we see it and when we think it can affect us. And so one thing I told to this guy, he was a Trump person, and you guys need to give me a hand for, just not slapping the fire out of him, because I was really a good girl. But he was saying that reports of the virus were overblown. And I said, oh, I just want to ask you a question. I asked them, I said, if you were in the hospital and somebody came into your room with a garbage bag on to protect him or herself, what would you think? And he said, that would never happen to me. And that's the problem. People who are privileged don't see, don't feel, don't understand. And I said also that if one poor person in Ohio has the virus and is not diagnosed and goes to work, then you're going to get it too. And so those types of realities are things that we have to be sharing with people in this day and age. So we have 52,000 people in prison in Ohio. We all know what's going on in the prisons. Those are virtual death camps. That, in addition to the places where the children and the adults are being held in the detention centers for immigrants. Those are death camps. And again, people who are distanced from that, they just don't even think about it. One of the reasons interstates are built in the way they are built in states is because they go around areas of poverty. So if you don't see poverty, then you don't think poverty is really an issue. If you have to drive through poor neighborhoods on a daily basis, your perspective is different. And that's what I think is going on in our country as concerns how we deal with each other. But if one of us is sick, all of us are sick. All of us are sick. And if one of us are suffering, eventually all of us are going to suffer. So we need to pay attention to statistics like that. Next slide, Joan. So we already, kind of hit on the reasons why some people don't vote or don't think it's important to vote. If you are feeling reluctant about voting or even registering to vote, again, I want to get your input. Why are you feeling reluctant? Anybody? Somebody is muted.
Ask the question again, Susan.
If you are feeling reluctant, if you are hesitant about either registering to vote or going to vote, period, what are some of those reasons?
I'm not sure this is the crowd for that question.
There may be some.
Maybe.
There, Lucy.
I have an idea. I've thought that this is Lucy Steiner from Mons. I think that when I feel that I have no power over what's happening and what is happening is scary, I want no part of the whole thing.
Mm. Yeah.
Well, you're not saying that personally, Lucy.
Well, I'm just saying how I would feel if I felt that way and felt I had no power.
Yep.
Anybody else? So I can rephrase the question. What have you heard other people give you reasons why they are reluctant to vote?
Because it doesn't make any difference.
Heard that.
Yep. My sister has said that to me 2 days ago.
Okay, anybody else?
Because they don't see people who care about their issues and connect to them personally running for office. And if they do see people who care about their issues and running for office, they never seem to win.
Okay.
I also think there's a percentage of our population of people who are afraid to register or vote for a variety of reasons, you know, police presence, maybe at the polling places or something like that. In other words, there's some intimidation for a certain segment of our population, which is, you know, maybe not unfounded.
Right.
Yeah. And Erna says that one problem she sees is that some of us, you know, she says live in bubbles. She doesn't know anyone who does not vote or anyone who says that they don't, you know, want to vote. So.
And Erna, you're probably not by yourself because we do live in bubbles, all of us. Part of the purpose for the community conversations is to get us out of those bubbles and to get us in conversations with people that we might never even look at, let alone talk with. And so as Joan and I have talked about this, we have said that before the virus, the plan was to go to different communities in Ohio that would, you know, that are pretty much ignored. You know, like rural areas are pretty much ignored. I mean, I understand why they, you know, they go for the orange monster in the White House. Excuse me if I've offended anybody, but I just have to find a way to do that. But because he appears to listen to them. Now, he really doesn't listen to them, but he appears to listen to them and he connects with them on a very emotional place. Somebody said that they don't, they imagine that if they felt like they didn't have any power, they wouldn't want to vote. People in rural communities, people in urban communities, people who, the marginalized people all the time, most of the time feel like they don't matter. And so the purpose of these community conversations initially was to go into these areas and sit down with people and have conversations with people and find out what they're thinking and what's bothering them and what is scaring them and what is pissing them off. So we can't do that right now because of the virus. But that's the whole purpose, because so many people, even in those rural areas, I joked around with Joan, but I wasn't fooling. I said I was going to go to neighborhoods in or communities in Appalachia and have conversations with people. Now I know they don't like Black people. Well, I feel like they don't like Black people. So I said to Joan, I said, I'm going, but I'm not going by myself. But I think that's what I'm talking about, us coming out of our bubbles and going into places and going into neighborhoods and sitting down and having a cup of coffee with people and finding out what keeps them up at night. That's where we are.
And we're hoping that if we are able to actually meet with people face to face before the election and before the time of registration deadline in October, that you might be willing to hold these kind of conversations in your neighborhoods with people you know, and then reaching out maybe onto the western side of Ohio, where, you know, and the Southwest, where it is a little bit more rural and some places are a little bit less connected like this. So we're hoping that you guys might want to volunteer to hold these kind of conversations, especially as we're able to do them face to face with folk.
And the purpose of the conversations is not to be combative or defensive. The purpose is to listen. You don't have to agree with somebody, but you have to listen to them. That's what we're trying to get us to do. I don't have to agree. You don't have to agree with me as an African-American woman about the things I go through, but at least take the time to listen. And I think that's what the people are thinking in these various communities, and nobody even takes the time. When we do canvassing, the door-to-door thing, sometimes you can stand on a porch with somebody and listen for like an hour because they're talking about things that are impacting their lives and nobody has ever talked with them before. So if we can talk to people and get, catalog, record what they're saying and get that out, maybe it will make a difference when it comes time for people to vote. Maybe somebody will go into the poll and say, you know what, they listened to me. And then we can make a difference and have elections, all the levels, local, state, and federal, and elections of people who will reflect our interests and our needs and protect our democracy.
I think there's a huge problem that people don't understand they have any obligation to vote. They don't understand sort of their duties as a citizen. I think that a lot of people I've talked to have said, well, I only vote for president. That's the only one that matters. And even when they do vote, they vote for the president or perhaps the governor and the top three people on the ticket. They don't look at issues. They don't, certainly in Ohio, vote for judges, which I think is pretty ridiculous about having judges on the ballot. But people just, it's so much time, it doesn't make any difference to them. They don't listen to politics. They don't want to listen to politics. They don't care, and they don't vote.
And you are absolutely right. And that is what, I'm going to say the other side, although I don't like to talk about side A and side B. I don't like that. But the other side has been strategically working for years to create an atmosphere where they can get their issues, their people on board. They understand that the masses of people feel just like your friend feels, like it doesn't make any difference. They understand that the masses of people don't worry about voting on the local level. So they have this, it's a very sophisticated strategy that they have, where they have been working for years, going in on the local level. Hear what I'm saying. They're going in on the local level and teaching and training people in some of their, in their ideology and in their belief systems. They call it, Christian, which is a whole different conversation. But they are wanting to make people understand that the goal, that America fell away from its intention, its intended purpose by the founders, which is not true, to be a Christian nation. So they make up myths, and they've been doing it for years, and they get people to buy into their whole ideology. If that's being done on a local level, which it is being done, and it's going up through the ranks, then the masses of people who are lying dormant are just, we're like cooked chicken. We're like, chopped liver, because they know that the masses of people are not being educated. They know that the masses of people are really kind of despondent over the system, knowing that they work to educate. So my thing, Joan and I's thing is that we counter that with education, with letting people know what the deal is and letting them know if you vote, you guys tell me, if we vote, if Donald Trump is voted out of office, but Mitch McConnell is still the speaker still the majority leader, and the Senate is still predominantly or majority Democrat, what good have we done? If you get a Democratic president in and the Senate is still led by Mitch McConnell, and the majority, you still have even a slight majority of Republicans in the Senate, what have we done? You see what I'm saying? People have to understand that. They can't just go and vote for the president and think they've done something. Because if we vote for the president, but we keep, Republicans in office and the judgeships and the governorships and all those other offices that vote against our interests, that work against our interests, our vote then does not count. Does that make sense? It doesn't count. It doesn't count in the way that it should.
Jean has a comment. And gerrymandering, yes, that's part of it.
Gerrymandering in Ohio drastically affects who we get as our representatives in the federal government, the House of Representatives. Here in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it's difficult. And when you look at that, it can be so daunting that you just sit down and say, I give up. That's what we absolutely cannot do. I mean, there's something about fighting against these walls that are put up in front of us. There's something to be said about fighting with this, you know, I call it crazy faith, but this almost stupid tenacity that says you will not steal our joy. You will not steal our liberty. But it's a tenacity, guys, that takes an inordinate amount of strength and even more education.
Jean says on chat that compared to voter turnout in other democracies, America has one of the lowest. And why is that? I mean,
Anybody
you've already
want to
touched on some of that.
Yeah, because there's a lot of reasons for that. And I like, in Australia, if you don't vote, you get fined $3 and everybody votes. Just,
I like that.
You know, it's just automatic that you're supposed to vote. And if you don't, you get a ticket, basically. And people don't want to spend $3 because they didn't vote, and they vote.
We also make it very difficult to vote in this country.
Yes. Also, putting up barriers all over the place. But one of the things I was thinking of earlier was I worked for Planned Parenthood back in the 70s and the 80s. And the Right to Life organization, which is extremely strong in southwestern Ohio, got smart and a strategy. And like she said, but they were based on a single issue, but they got people who really cared about this issue to understand that they need to vote. They need to put people in office who agree with them. They need to get judges elected who agree with them. And they train people to run for office, and it has paid off in spades. And it's taken 30 years. But look where they are, and they've got right to life people on the Supreme Court and on the presidency and every place else. And it's
interesting statistic or interesting fact. Way back before Roe v. Wade, abortion was not an issue for the conservatives. What got conservatives angry was that there was a move to remove federal funding from institutions, specifically colleges, but other organizations that promoted segregation. They didn't like that. And so the leaders got together, and it's all in this book and others, you know, this power worshipers thing. But they got together and they had to figure out an issue that would draw people in and get people motivated. And so these people, Ronald Reagan didn't have any problem with abortion. You know, they list all these leaders that didn't have any problem with it, but they were angry because they needed for there to be a continuation of federal funding for some of the causes that they believed in. And abortion was not on the radar, but segregation or segregated universities was. And so they maneuvered and manipulated the issue so that abortion became, the right to life became the issue. And they built it and built it and built it and built it. At the end of the day, I'm not sure how many people, I'm not sure at this point about what the underlying purpose is, but the purpose of them switching was to continue to get the money from the federal government so that they could maintain power. So we got to understand this right to life thing. People, it's so manipulative. When I heard that, I was driving, I was listening to a report. When I heard that, I just about ran into a tree, because at this point, you know, the right to life is such an issue, but it is a wedge issue designed to make people continue to give to the conservative political machine. That's what it was created to, not morphed into something now. But and so we have to understand that. I don't know what we do, and that's why these kinds of discussions are really important. But to think that it was based on, you know, an anger about federal funding being removed from universities because of segregation just makes my blood boil.
As well it should.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's going on in Texas right now?
Okay, so
Charles is just asking us to remember if we can talk a little bit slower. He's having hard time staying with it. He can hear it, but it goes a little fast and it makes it hard for him to hear.
Okay, I'm going to try to talk slower. I have a tendency to talk fast anyway. Then when I get excited, it's even worse. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
So since 2010, and 24 states have implemented, this is about now voter suppression. It's a major issue. Now, Alabama requires a photo ID to cast a ballot. Ohio and Georgia have enacted the use it or lose it laws, resulting in a whole bunch of people being purged from the rolls. When we were out on the streets for the 2018 elections, and we were going out to people and saying, are you registered to vote? And most people wanted to blow us off. But I would say, well, wait, are you sure you're registered? And of course, people would say yes, but we had our iPads with us. And we said, well, let's check it. And so we checked it. And I cannot even tell you how many people found out on the spot that they had been purged. And they were mad. So what they did was they re-registered on site. They re-registered on site. They realized that they had to, I don't remember if we could re-register on site or what, but they knew they had to re-register. And then what we did was, as we asked them to go home and put it on social media, that this purge thing was very real and that people should check their registrations to make sure that they were still on the rolls. This woman, Carol Anderson, said that she's an author and a historian who lives in Georgia, but she said that she checks her registration once a week, once a week. Because this thing is so insidious, this move to keep people off of the rolls is so insidious that we cannot be sure that that which we have always taken for granted is what we think it is. So there's this broader strategy to tighten access to the ballot. And one of the reasons why people have lost faith in America is because we were built on the principle, supposedly, that there is one person and one vote. And so as that has been, as that myth has been broken down, people have lost faith in the system. So we have, in front of us, we have a video. How many of you realize or had issues with what happened in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago? Oh my God. Did you see the picture of the Republican guy who was fully covered with a mask and a gown and gloves? And he stood in front of a camera and he said, nobody has to worry, it's completely safe. I was so livid. I was just like, what kind of dummies do you think we are? But anyway, we have this short video that we're gonna run for you having to do with Wisconsin.
We expect more cases, we expect more deaths, we expect more tragedies. I cannot in good conscience allow any types of gathering that would further the spread of this disease and to put more lives at risk. There's not a sufficiently safe way to administer in-person voting tomorrow.
I am 65. I'm a type 2 diabetic. I've had heart issues. I mean, those are the risk factors they say can make it more serious.
I actually think that it's suppressive and dangerously irresponsible that the legislature hasn't either delayed the election or made it all mail-in ballot. I had a moment where I just really was not sure that I could do this. I woke up crying.
We have some best practices thing set up in there with a plexiglass shield between the voter and the poll workers. We're going to have masks available, gloves available, hand sanitizer, but it's still going to be something that is a risk. We normally use 13 different polling locations. We normally have 300 poll workers to staff those locations. As of 10 days ago, we were down to 40.
So that was this situation in Wisconsin, and I'm holding my breath, hoping and praying that there is just not an explosion of people who become infected, having stood in those lines, in that line or those lines for all those hours. Not only did they stand in the line with the gloves and the mask, but they stood in the midst of a horrible, I hear, thunderstorm. They were rained on and hail fell on them, and they still stayed. The positive part of that is it shows that tenacious desire that we have to have, that we're trying to inject in people, to work our system the way it's supposed to be worked. That's the positive thing. But the negative part of it is that any group of people would have the tenacity and the audacity to make people stand out for an in-person election during a pandemic. And if there is a God someplace, you know, the good thing for me is that the Republican candidate for judge lost. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying. Yeah. I felt a great deal of justification. Yeah. But anyway, excuse me. So we have a lot of purging still going on in Ohio. We have our primary that's going to come up on April 28th, but it's not in person, only if you're disabled. And we depend on people in Ohio to let people know your registration has to be in by April 25th. Your ballot has to be in, but the process of getting the ballot is cumbersome. And my feeling, a lot of people don't understand how that process is going to work, and how a lot of people are still not going to be able to vote. So Joan is going to talk more about that a little bit later, but that is the situation in Ohio. Right.
There we go.
So something is wrong in Ohio big time. We were 29th in the United States in voter turnout in 2018. That's not good. Only 50.4% of registered Ohio voters turned out in 2018. Only 22% of voters ages 18 to 24 turned out. Our youth turnout is awful. We really have to do something to increase that. Comparatively, Minnesota had a turnout of 64.2%, and Montana, Wisconsin, and Oregon all had 61% or more voter turnout. So we have work to do in Ohio. They always say, as goes Ohio, so goes the nation. Well, we got to change something here in Ohio because something is clearly wrong. Yep. So now we have this video, and this is one that was done by Stacey Abrams. And Joan and I showed this video in all of the work that we do because it is just so profound, and it shows what voter suppression is on a number of different levels. We want you to watch it. If you want to jot notes down about it, please do. And I think Joan is going to provide the link, so if you have your own community conversations, you can show it as well, because I think this video does more than anything either Joan or I could say to show people how voter suppression really works. So we're going to roll this video.
And then we'll discuss it.
Georgia's tight race for governor is getting national attention.
Brian Kemp is not only the Republican gubernatorial nominee, he's Georgia's Secretary of State.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Volunteers are picking up phones and knocking on doors across the state. Come in and register to vote.
We are very excited to register as many people as we possibly can.
What do we want?
Register to vote!
When do we want it?
Today!
I come as one, but I stand as 10,000.
Pull back that veneer. And you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in. They're in the wood. They're eating the wood away. And you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late.
We have a historic decision today
striking down a key part of the Voting Rights Act, a civil rights law passed back in 1965.
The Supreme Court essentially said racism is over, and these communities don't need to pre-clear these changes anymore.
This decision leaves virtually unprotected minority voters in communities all over this country.
We are witnessing a tidal wave of voter suppression around the country.
If you look at Alabama,
Arkansas, North Carolina,
Ohio,
Kansas, North Dakota,
Michigan,
Wisconsin,
and Georgia, which is becoming ground zero.
We've got to understand, this isn't a Klan cross burning. This stuff is very bureaucratic, it's very mundane, it's very routine, but it is lethal.
For spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain.
My name is Bobby Jenkins. I live in Cuthbert, Georgia. The county is Randolph County. I spent about almost 35 years in education. I'm a superintendent of schools.
My name is Loretta Brown. I live in Morgan, Georgia, and I grew up in Randolph County. I am the state advisor for the Georgia NAACP Youth and College Division.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomason, Georgia, Upson County, and I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voter right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there, I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss the voting, except when they closed the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion.
I saw this ad saying that there was a proposal to close 7 of the 9 precincts in Randolph County. I said, what?
Then they put it in the papers that they was closing polls, costing too much money.
First of all, Randolph is a poor county. Just to give you an example of what it would mean, there's a community benevolence a little north of town. Had that precinct been closed, some of those individuals would have to go 30 miles round trip in order to vote. It would have been a terrible hardship on our poor, on our elderly, and on those who are least able to afford transportation.
No, I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was in a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they were closing down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black section go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Voters in Randolph County, Georgia are outraged.
Randolph County residents expressed their concerns with the Board of Elections.
Our citizens turned out in full force. They were behind us 100%, trying to keep those polling places open.
Convenience of the voter. You all are not considering that at all.
There's no disenfranchisement for the African Americans.
I went to the meeting, find out that they were trying to close 7 of the precincts.
You've got to stand up. You cannot allow this to continue.
They gave a couple of reasons, saying it would save money. The other one was that several of the polling places were not ADA compliant. The thing that was so ironic is we voted that way in May. You know, they weren't any worse in November than they were in May.
It will be impossible for rural voters without vehicles to vote on Election Day. It will be impossible for them. They will have to walk 3.5 hours just to get from one of these polling places to Cuthbert and Shellman.
We did petition to keep it open. Pressure from the residents, civil rights organization, speaking up, speaking out.
They called the meeting to order, and they only had one motion. They voted to keep them open.
The news of what was happening here in Randolph County went worldwide.
The incident that we experienced threw the spotlight on everything else that had been going on. You know, we find out that in the state of Georgia, there were over 200 other polling places had been closed.
If you move a poll 4 miles, it is the equivalent of a 20% drop in black voter turnout. That's what shutting down these polls mean.
With 2 months to go, the race is heating up in Georgia.
Stacey Abrams' campaign feel they have the momentum behind them, and many of the posts we've seen so far support that.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters. If they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
There's no law in Georgia that requires the Secretary of State to process voter registration forms on a particular timeline.
Kemp withheld putting the names of thousands on the voter registration list until after the election.
80% were African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
This is Fulton County. Linda Marshall is my name. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history.
Keep your eyes on.
It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion. Welcome to Georgia.
Hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize.
The midterm election in Georgia is only 29 days away.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Republican Brian Kemp has already gotten the backing of our current president.
Thousands are purged from Georgia's voter rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000. They had no idea they could vote.
Other states use the same
over who's been removed from the voter rolls.
There has been instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the City of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The City of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
If you haven't voted in the last few elections, they'll purge you, as if you must not be in the state anymore. If you move within the same county, they'll purge you, assuming you're not living in Georgia anymore. If you don't return a postcard from the Secretary of State, they'll purge you, because to them it means you're not a resident at this address. All of these tactics specifically and disproportionately target people of color, poor people, the elderly, all of whom tend to vote for Democrats.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
You have a candidate at the top of the ticket who is responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Less than 20 days away from the midterms now.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
Literally is a dead heat.
This governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
At a time where we're seeing roughly almost half of the people who've turned in an absentee ballot are people of color, that's a really, really good sign for Stacey Abrams.
We caught them off guard by running such a large-scale program and mailed 1.6 million African Americans an absentee ballot application.
In this midterm election, the absentee ballot requests are even outperforming presidential years. So that is startling and eye-popping and something that we need to dig in on to see what's going on there.
My name is Norman Broderick. I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I
checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. And she admitted that yes, they did mess up. It was their fault. But there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. It's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in, voting absentee."
So I submitted an absentee ballot. It came 2 days right before Election Day.
Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on statewide.
I did speak with the Board of Elections, and he just dismissed it as like a hiccup. And he's like, "Oh, like, no, you don't really know what you're talking about." 40 cases, not really a hiccup. It's more of like a wake-up call.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
Great Tuesday morning, Election Day.
The race between Abrams and Kemp is literally neck and neck.
Their fate is now in the hands of voters.
The day is finally upon us.
The midterm elections are happening.
Voters head to the polls in one of the most intensely fought midterm elections.
The race for Georgia's governorship is a toss-up.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about Election Day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Voting started here in Georgia this morning, and if you think hitting the polls early will keep you from getting stuck on long lines, think again.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
I've never seen one.
The line hasn't moved in over an hour. The line is running out.
I really thought I was going to be able to run in and run out like I usually do. The first thing I saw was just people everywhere. So we stood there for a while without moving. And then we would inch up. And then we wouldn't move. We had a lot of people with children there, pregnant mothers, elderly people. Some people have medical issues.
I took my son to school that morning, and then I went to vote at Ferguson Elementary, where I vote every election. The line just keeps getting longer. The line was so long through the school and wrapped around the building. The lines was crazy everywhere, all over the county. It was real long. I was in line for 2 hours. And I got to the door. That's when they was checking your ID before you go in. And she couldn't find my name. She directed me to go downtown Gwinnett. And I was like, I'm not gonna vote. And it was this older lady, she came over and she like held my hand and was like, please go do it. We need this. And I looked in her eyes and said, I will.
Register somewhere else and they pulled it up in the system. Don't say my
About 8 or 9, we started getting the calls about the long lines.
Long lines at the polling stations lead to low voter turnout. The research is just crystal clear on that.
Everyone in the world knew we were going to vote today. And in my neighborhood, there are no power cords. All these dedicated people waiting to vote. This is what we call voter suppression.
People were like upset and angry. I started calling the Secretary of State's office. I was either hung up on, placed on hold. They want people to go home and not vote. I ain't going nowhere. I'ma be right here.
The reason they sent me from Ferguson to the downtown Gwinnett was for the provisional vote. So I drove 25 minutes, and then when I got there, it was crowded in there. I waited 45 minutes to find out that's not where I needed to be. She told me that this was the wrong place and that I can go back to Ferguson. I had to call back and redo my schedule. So now the voting not only cut on my time, cut on my money.
When we went in, filled out all the paperwork, had the ID, took it up to the lady. I had mine in my hand. One hand had hers in the other, because she's legally blind. So we go give it to the lady, and she goes to scan Barbara's ID. Wow. And so she looked up at Barbara. She said, well, Miss Barbara, when was the last time you voted? My sister got strong. I've been voting since I was 18 years old, and I'm 82.
I was disappointed.
She was a little upset. My girl wanted to vote, and they were trying to keep her from voting.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up, and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, no, you're not registered. And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Latinos and Asian Americans are 6 times more likely than white Georgians to be cut from the voter rolls because of exact match, and Black Americans are 8 times more likely to be cut because of exact match.
I have voted in every election, and all of a sudden I'm not there.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
The students was being turned away. I talked to over 50 students that morning.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had 2 heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what?
When I got to the front of the line, they informed me that I was registered to vote, but not in Dougherty County. They were telling me that I was registered back home in Winter Robins, where I was from, and I've never voted there. I've never even been registered there.
The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a U.S. citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
I had been through and participated in voter registration drive on campus, within a community. It was just like, wow, after all of this, I'm not going to be able to vote myself.
Like when I was growing up,
Voting was a thing. It was an event. And so little me is trailing behind my parents watching them vote.
My parents would take me to the voting polls every time when I was little. I would go in and I would help them fill out the bubbles.
I get a chance to vote, and then you get there and the experience is just terrible, and you have to call your mom and be like, why is this so hard? You never told me it would be this hard.
This was huge for us because Stacey Abrams was actually a Spelman alum. History would have been made, and it would have been made by my Spelman sister.
If there is no one who gets to 50% tonight, Robin, there will be a runoff in December.
We'll find out as the day and evening goes on.
Voter Protection Hotline, how can I help you?
Are they letting you know now? Are you really kidding me?
Old people who can't vote, there's young people who can't vote, there's people in every county who can't vote. It just created this intense fog of confusion across the state. Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait. 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
And have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
All night on Twitter, a trending topic, hashtag stay in line.
I had to go and pick my son up. He had to be picked up before 6. I picked my son up and he went with me and sat in the car. And then I went back to Ferguson Elementary. And by this time, the evening crowd is there and the line has tripled. And I was like, oh, there is no way. Just for my one vote, it took me like 6 hours. And I wanted to give them because I promised that elderly lady outside that I would do it.
5 hours, so about 5 hours took me to vote. It sucks the life out of you.
I'd been in people's homes, I'd been in their neighborhoods, I'd held their hands. And so to get to election night and to start hearing more and more stories of voter suppression, to hear more and more from people who were told that they couldn't vote or who were turned away or had to give up because of 4-hour lines. That broke my heart.
Republican Brian Kemp holds a narrow lead over Democrat Stacey Abrams.
Tens of thousands of ballots left to be counted in this election. They were counting provisional ballots for hours.
Provisional ballots are basically placebos. They're being given to voters to kind of shut them up, make them go away.
The next day, I was so excited because they were saying that it was a close race. I was like, oh, let me make sure that my vote count. So I called there, the number that was on the paper that I got from the voting poll. And she go, oh no, they counting every vote. You don't need to call. I called my mom to double check. My mom worked for the poll for 20-some years. And she said, no, that's not true. You call back to make sure the vote count. And someone else says to the phone, and I got the same thing. No, you don't need to call back. We counting all the votes.
We just started discovering so many people voting provisionally. We realized, oh, you voted provisionally, so you might have to come back here the next day and show your ID. Is that something you know? And they're like, no, I already voted. Like, I'm good.
But you have to come back within 3 days with the documentation to prove you are who you say you are. When you have a large working class population that has to punch a clock, that's really tough. You've lost pay from work trying to vote. That's a poll tax.
I wanted to confirm if my vote was counted or not.
All right, what is your last name?
Kimball.
Let's see, there was no participation.
So does that...
You weren't given credit for voting.
My vote was not counted.
It looks like it on election day, yes, ma'am.
No, I thank you. Goodbye.
Last night, my opponent ended her campaign. The election is over, and I'm honored to be Georgia's governor-elect.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling. This is not a speech of concession. Because concession means to acknowledge an action is right, true, or proper. As a woman of conscience and faith, I cannot concede that.
This is systematic. If you look at what has happened across this country in the last 5 years, 40 states have passed some kind of law to make it more difficult for people to vote.
In Arkansas, the Supreme Court upheld a measure requiring voters to show photo ID.
North Carolina, where it targeted African Americans. In Alabama, the governor was shutting down DMVs.
In Ohio.
Kansas, tens of thousands of people were prevented from voting.
Texas allows a concealed gun license to vote, but will not include college IDs.
Indiana, they purge 500,000 voters.
Wisconsin, where a recent photo ID law may have handed the 2016 election to Donald Trump.
We lost 41,000 voters. I think it changed the outcome of the election in the state of Wisconsin.
America. We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
We are here to resist an ID law that is undemocratic, unconstitutional, and immoral.
People are demanding democracy. In Washington, there's a new Native American Voting Rights Act. New Mexico now has same-day voter registration. Colorado, Nevada, Florida, and Arizona all passed laws restoring voting rights to those formerly incarcerated. Indiana blocked a law that would have allowed purging. New York, activism led to an expansive package of voting reforms. Michigan, a ballot initiative to end extreme partisan gerrymandering. And there's national legislation now to restore the Voting Rights Act.
These efforts are being fought in the streets. They are being fought in the city councils. They are being fought in the state legislators.
We belong together. We are all part of the fabric of this country, and we understand what's at stake.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people. It is about America itself.
On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
We have the power to change this. We are going to vote you out so that we really do have fair and free elections.
Okay. So, after seeing this video, can you just give us one word about what you're feeling?
Okay. I think this is voter fraud. Called voter suppression is voter fraud.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Determined.
Angry.
Determined. Angry.
Sick. Angry.
Angry.
Inspiring.
Okay.
Angry. Inspired.
Anybody else? What makes you most angry?
The systematic nature of it, the multiple tools that were used to strip people of the right to vote.
And determined, what are you determined to do?
Pat had her hand up too.
I'm sorry.
That's good. Pat, go ahead.
Just the sheer dishonesty of it.
Yeah.
It's blatant. It is so
Blatant dishonesty, yes.
Oh, goodness, Lord.
And Maria says she's disgusted.
Okay. So this is your reactions are like the reactions we've gotten almost everybody's gone, and that's the reason we show it, because we want people to understand how wide this effort is to keep people from voting and how deep it is. I don't know if you've had experiences like that, but I'm going to throw the discussion now over to Joan, and maybe we can incorporate those experiences into what Joan is going to share with us now.
Okay. Well, I do want to ask the question if any of you have ever experienced any of those things that you saw in the video or anything like that. Because whether you have, if you haven't, that says something. If you have, that says something.
Yeah, I've had two experiences. I was a poll watcher for the Democratic Party in Hamilton County, and that was organized in response to the presence of Republican poll watchers who had done disproportionate presence in minority voting districts in Hamilton County in order to challenge voters and to intimidate them. So in defense, the Democratic Party recruited attorneys to stay at a polling place for the entire day and to prevent that kind of intimidation.
Yeah.
The second experience I had was being a plaintiff for the American Civil Liberties Union in a case that challenged the punch card ballots that we used to have, because you know about the hanging chads that were an issue, and the number of flawed ballots that were discarded disproportionately impacted minority voters. And so when I was called as a witness in that lawsuit, I was able to speak as a former faculty member at Wilberforce University, the oldest private African-American college in the state. And back after the Civil War, there had been an Ohio law that disenfranchised the Black voters at Wilberforce University. So this is nothing new. It's just that it's been a switch in parties. A century ago, it was the Democratic Party that tried to disenfranchise Black voters, and currently it's the Republican Party.
I was one of those poll watchers back then too. I know what you mean, Howard. Anybody else had any experiences of witnessing some voter suppression or purging?
I worked the polls. I was a voting location manager in North Side down in Cincinnati here. And we saw, I mean, for one thing, the 2018, there was more people turned out than they expected maybe, but the lines were just, I mean, people were waiting in line an hour for, a midterm election, and it just, more than an hour or more. It didn't feel right. One of the reasons I worked as a poll worker is I wanted to try and make sure that at least people who made it to the front got treated fairly and were able to vote. They said in Ohio that something like 80% of provisional ballots get counted, but I just wanted to make sure that we had all the documentation we needed and did the best job we could.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? I can testify about what happened with students because we had some registration drives down at OSU. And one of the students that had been registered was from First UU Columbus. And so when we were doing tabling and such right before the midterm, she wanted to check her registration because she was so proud of the fact that she had registered on the OSU campus. And her registration was not there. So thank God we were able to register her. But it got purged and she was not registered anymore. Anybody else? Okay.
I do have one situation when out-of-state college students came to Ohio for a campaign. And at that point in Ohio, we had same-day registration and voting.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of those college students cast 2 votes. They voted once in Ohio, and then they went home and voted a second time. And I challenged the campaign organization about that issue because it tremendously upset me, given our perception that it's the Republicans that cheat, that this was done by Democrats in a closely contested presidential election. And so Ohio has now done away with the same-day registration and voting. But it was a more complicated issue than, this is just voter suppression.
So
Because
rather than
it was
fixing it,
subject to
though,
abuse.
yeah, rather than fixing it, they did away with it.
Right.
Yeah. So what do you think we can do to prevent what happened in Georgia and Wisconsin from happening here? What do you think we can do?
Well, one thing that they do in Oregon and Washington is mail vote by mail only. And then there's only one, they can check them when they come in at the state level or wherever they're doing it, the election, but they have less chance of duplication because they have mail-in voting only.
Mm-hmm. Colorado too. Other things, yeah, Liz, go ahead. You're still muted, hold on.
Okay.
I unmuted you there.
Okay, we could have adequate voting places because if there's not enough, people are suddenly they're gone or didn't get the message, they're not going to be able to vote. And I think that's really important, especially when they talk about having to stand in line so long that they have to go back to work or are just fatigued in general. That's just out of line.
Yep. Or you have to go take your medicine if you're diabetic, or et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Yep.
Why don't we
Others.
vote on Sundays instead of Tuesdays? I feel like more people would come out.
There's nothing holy about a Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's something that was left over from the very earliest days when it was thought that people could take Monday and Tuesday to vote and then get back home. There's nothing holy about a Tuesday. Charles, yeah.
I feel a little adrift because I just moved to Cincinnati in July of last year. And I spent most of my adult life in Oregon. So I got pretty used to the political landscape and then the administrative and, how rules actually play out in fact.
Yeah.
Did a lot of, voter registration, poll watching, and voter turnout activities, phone banking, and so on. But, and maybe it's partly I think everything gets changed in my experience by the pandemic experience. And just there's a lot of anxiety about that. But I feel like the time is very short. I would love to see, I think it is possibly a real possibility in Ohio for a big campaign to insist on mail ballots. But I have no idea of what the political landscape is in the legislature, whether that's even realistic. And if it isn't, we should be damn well doing something else in terms of how we have personal contact with people through Zoom calls or whatever, to encourage them to make every effort to make sure they're registered, double check it if we think whatever. But I'm ignorant enough about the state that I don't know all the things that experienced voter protection activists know as to what's the priority. And I think there are a lot of us that would be ready to sign up if it looked like we have a really solid plan. But right now I feel like, you know, the texting things, once I went through all my 39 Ohio contacts in Google Contacts, I had 9 that were useful to do the texting activity. I did contact people, but so I am eager for the experienced leadership we have here, even on this call. And I just worry about frittering away our time with strategies that may not be implementable between now and when we vote in November. Thank you.
Yeah, Joan, could you speak to that? I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah, actually, yes, actually, the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, you, Joe, is a part of that. Crazy Faith Ministries is part of that. 40 other state agencies right now are part of that. And there is a lot of push for a mail-only election. And that would have to come before the state legislature when they come back into session. So there are people gearing up for that. The ACLU is part of it. The League of Women Voters is part of that in Ohio. We also right now are, and I'll show you, are working on how we can help people register to vote, even using cell phone and social media. And that's something that I hope you all registered for this webinar, because I can get your name and your email address from the registration if you registered. If you didn't register, please put your email address in the chat box so I can get a hold of you, because we do have things that we're working on right now so that we can register as many people as possible so that they can, whether we do it by mail or whether we're able to do in-person voting by November, we still need to get people registered to vote. Okay, so there's part of that. Yeah.
Is there an active move in progress to register people at the time that they get a driver's license or renew their driver's license?
There is another. The part of the Voter Rights Coalition have submitted a request to do a petition that would be on the November ballot. It wouldn't be active for the November ballot. It would be on the November ballot. And this petition would protect voter rights going forward. And part of it was same-day registration. Another part of it was guarantee a time of early voting, and several other rights that would be protected. The Ohio Ballot Committee, Petition Committee, tried to block that, saying it was actually 4 different petitions, so you needed to get 4 different petitions and enough votes or signatures for 4 different ones. And now a court has said, no, it can be 1 petition again. So this Monday, a couple days from now, I'll be on the call to hear what the final language is with this petition and how we can gather petition signatures by social media and email and on Zoom, because we're not going to be able to go door to door and get the 44,000 signatures that we need to get this puppy moving. So that's something that I'll hear more about on Monday, and then I'll be sending out word to all people on my UU Justice Ohio list on how you can be part of that petition operation so that we can restore a number of voter rights and guarantees here in Ohio. Wouldn't be active for this coming November election, but for ones following, it would be on the books. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's part of one of the volunteer things that I want to ask you to do is be part of that. And that's, pardon me, what reasons do you see for working in voter advocacy, for education, for registration, for networking, for petition gathering? Yeah, Liz.
A lot of young people are feeling very disenfranchised by voter suppression, and that they don't feel like this is a democracy. And I feel that we are failing everyone whose vote is suppressed because they're not able to exercise their rights.
People who didn't have access to a computer and a printer could not easily send in an application to get an absentee ballot for this coming primary. So I can see why younger people would feel that way, and people who didn't have access to a computer and a printer feel that way. So
There were problems with the some of the mail-in applications anyway. Some of them went out without having a place for signature, and so I had to go in twice to change that. And the self-addressed envelopes they gave us didn't have the right amount of postage on them.
And much of that is intentional. That's, that's the thing that we have to be trained. Part of what we're going to be talking with us about is that people have to be trained on all of the little pieces of this that people need to be aware of, because a lot of what you just mentioned, Liz, is intentional. It's just intentional.
Yeah, I mean, and then when they said, oh, for the primary this time in Ohio, you can go to your Board of Elections and just pick up an application. But the Board of Elections offices, many of them, there's 88, many of them are not staffed because of the coronavirus, or they're staffed irregularly. So this is something that we're seeing. We're seeing some voter suppression right here, right now, on our very faces. And this is why we're going to have to put out a lot more energy to make sure that our November ballot, that our November election is fair. And we're all going to have to get on board with this one. UU Justice Ohio has taken this as its focus for the next several months until the election, till November. This is going to be our focus, is working to make sure that we have that right to vote and a way to exercise it. So yeah, it's not something we're used to having to fight for. Now, people in poorer communities, they've had to fight for it, but educated UUs have got to fight for it too, because we're just as subject now to the various purges and problems as everybody else. So we're all in this boat together.
And that's a blessing.
Yeah.
Blessing, because people don't, unless people feel like it affects them, they don't get the energy. But when people begin to realize that this affects me too, then they get the energy. So that's a blessing.
Yeah, because we're all in this boat together. We also know that a lot of our Ohio communities are underrepresented in turnout. Voices are not being heard in a way that makes, a difference. Voter registration is that first step in creating communities. People who are registered to vote are there as, members of the community in a much more active way. And we all know that folk that are elected pay attention to constituents that vote. And we need all of our communities to be valued and all of them to heard if we're going to do any of the social change that we say we want to do.
Joan, are there any minority organizations, Black churches in the State Voting Rights Coalition?
Oh, yes. Susan, do you know some more of the folk that are in that coalition? Because there's so many, I've lost count.
There are a lot, but the work there's a separate what do you call it, line, that's not right, what I'm looking for, trail of work that we're doing with the congregations of color African American churches, because we have a couple of specifically cultural hurdles to get through to the people even on the battlefield. But yes, it exists.
Yes, and including the Ohio Council of Churches too, which does represent a great many of the Black churches. They're involved in that Ohio Voter Rights Coalition as well.
Right. So for those of us in the Cincinnati area, are you able to provide contacts for us in the minority community?
Well,
what are you looking for, Howard?
We have communication with Maria. Maria probably could help us get contacts.
I mean, I'm in Cincinnati and I work with a lot of folks in voting here. What are you looking for, Howard?
Well, I'm just remembering Damon Lynch, Ennis Tate. You know, I'm wondering who are the leaders in the Black community that are likely to engage in this statewide effort.
We can find out. We know that right now, yeah.
Yeah, you know, as a political scientist, I'm familiar with academic literature that says it doesn't really work when white people go into the Black community and listen, and they try to get people to the polls on election day, that it's people responding to family, to friends, to their own community, rather than to outsiders who are suspect of having their own agenda.
That is so true, Howard. And that's one of the conversations that Joan and I have. I think this is a good opportunity for white people to talk to white people, because so many white people do not think they have ever been or would ever be subjected to oppression. Saying that there are African American pastors in the cities that we are mobilizing. And that's why Maria brings me, because we're coordinating some efforts with African American people like Damon Lynch, and people who have worked under Damon Lynch are sure they're working in Cincinnati and all of these areas. And our job is to coalesce these people, or Black people talk to Black people. But I think there is a need for white people to talk to white people. We cannot talk. Black people cannot talk to white people like we can talk to Black people, because too many white people think that we're just making excuses. So, but if white people talk to white people about something now that white people have learned that they didn't know before, I think it'll have a bigger impact.
Exactly. And I do know, like in Dayton, we have the NAACP from Dayton on board with the coalition, but we need those kind of contacts in Cincinnati, and I don't know who they are. I just know the Dayton ones.
I think too that we ought to try to work with the Amos Project at Christ Episcopal Church, as well as the Metropolitan Area Religious Coalition.
This is
and
good.
the thing I'm thinking of is candidates for City Council, which are not on the ballot this year, but there are candidates out there, new candidates, as well as those who are running for re-election. And we ought to ask them to work with the city to have the city pass some resolutions about restoring the Voter Rights Act.
And this is where we're going to count on you all in Cincinnati to come together and to form an advocacy team so that you are able to help address the issues in Cincinnati, so that you know the people that are contacted for Cincinnati, and folk that can be part of the advocacy.
Yeah,
I see Charles has something held up to the camera, but I can't see what it is. Bless you. Okay.
I can't do screen sharing with this because it's my cell phone.
Okay.
But I finally, took me this long during this call, fiddling with it. There's a free app that captions.
Oh, okay, great.
During the video and most of this conversation, there's enough normal distortion that the captioning app couldn't do it. But right now it's working, so I'm very grateful, except I think when I turn my phone away so I can read it, I won't be here seeing your captions. But just a little bit of what we have available to us and how it sometimes doesn't work.
That's a good thing to know, because as we organize in our different locations, in Toledo, in Cleveland, in Cincinnati, as you all come together as part of a voter team in Cincinnati, you may need to borrow some technology that, like Charles has, to help with folk who have some hearing issues, like my spouse, who has to use headphones. But we're
And
all...
I will email, or I'll email you, Joan, once I hear from you with a simple blurb how people can sign up for this free app.
Good.
They can have it in front of them on a phone call or whatever.
Now make sure you registered, or you send me your name and your email, put it in the chat box, because
You
only
have it.
6 of you, only 4 of you, pardon me, actually registered. I only have email and name for 4 of you. Okay, just to let you know that. Okay, if you got a reminder today about the registration, then
I'll
you're
put it
registered.
in the chat to make
Put
sure.
in the chat anyway, because I'm missing you. I only got 4 of you on there.
Joan, it's Paul Graham has been reorganizing Amos in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And I'm a little unclear about what happened with the Ohio Organizing Collaborative.
We need to talk about that, Howard, because it's a very long and involved story. And they are rebuilding right now. So it's not something we can draw on.
Okay.
They're part of the advocacy. They're part of the coalition, but they are rebuilding right now. That happens with nonprofits after
so Amos
something's happened.
I think Amos is a local group that we need to connect with.
It is.
So I know Paul, and I'll try and do that outreach.
Beautiful. Perfect. Because every other team is connecting with people in their cities. Susan and I know Columbus. We don't know Cincinnati.
Right.
And some of the things that I want to tell you, you might think that with COVID and being home, that we can't do anything until we can actually go face to face or set up a table at some community center. But you are wrong, because there are things we can do. We can text bank. We can text people who have cell phones and who are on there as registered voters and remind them, like we just did. We just did something like 500,000 or 600,000 texts to remind people to get their absentee ballot applications and tell them how to do that. Phone banking, where you start with your family, your friends, your coworkers, church congregants, and help them check to make sure that they are registered to vote, because we should start that now. And they can even vote with a computer, or they can register to vote on their cell phone. And we're getting a script for that, because Ohio Votes has outlined a script on how to guide somebody through how to register to vote on your cell phone, okay? We can get correct information out there. People still don't know that the Ohio primary is not June 2nd. They're still asking me. A UJO board member said 3 days ago, but the primary is on June 2nd. No, you got to get that in there by the 25th if you want it to count for the 28th. We can share statewide issues. We can talk about candidate information from the League of Women Voters, because they're right on top of it and they're broadcasting it. So we can tell people how much it counts. We can share the local issues. We can check their registrations by cell phone to make sure people haven't been purged, like students, like older folk, like myself, people who you wouldn't think would be purged because maybe we don't live in in the inner city or rural Appalachia, but they're being purged anyway. Franklin County found thousands of errors in the purge list, thousands of errors, and had to be corrected. And you can help us have online conversations like this, because tomorrow a member of a church over in North UU in Lewis Center, she and I are having this conversation. So you can learn how to do these conversations too. We can give you all the information and then help to register people face to face or by table when it's safe to do so. These are all the things that you can do, many of them right now. It's okay. So I'm gonna ask you, Put your email address in the chat box. And if you're willing to volunteer to do one of these things or a couple of these things, put in the chat box what you might be willing to do. We have subcommittees right now. We're forming the education part of this to teach people how to check registrations by cell phone, things like that. So let me know, if you can, what you can do, or I'll also send you an email just to ask, give you some time to think. Does that make sense? Okay. But at least check your own registration. At least talk to somebody about this, what you heard today. And then if you can volunteer, even though you can't go out. I can't go out, but there's lots of things we can do. Okay?
Joan, did you say you would make this link available for the film? I think that's extraordinary. I'd like to share that.
Yes, give me your email address and I will send you. I have it on my YouTube channel, but you can also get a link from the producers themselves. But my YouTube channel may be easier. So put it in the chat box and we will send that to you, okay?
Are you going to be doing a follow-up email to all the participants? And if so,
only those who give me their email address. If you didn't register and you don't give me your email
okay,
address,
but I registered, and what
then you're fine. Yeah.
That you put the link to that video in your follow-up.
I
so
will do that.
We all have it.
Yeah. Yep.
That's great.
Thank
We
you.
just want you to show it to as many groups of people as possible. You can do it
exactly
via parties on Facebook, but
right.
The more you show it, I think the more we'll have a
Yep.
mobilized group of people.
Right.
And if you want any of the things from the slides, I can send those to you too. I'll send you the recording link that we're making right now.
Thank you for organizing this.
Great.
It's been very good.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
And if nothing else, email me
Thank you all.
your name and your email address.
You have mine.
And Joan?
Okay? Yes.
Joan, I put in the chat a question about, some of these groups with the COVID don't have access to Zoom themselves. Is it possible that we can get, people can sponsor, like if your church has a Zoom account, maybe it only costs another, I don't know, $10 a month to have an extra number, or I don't know how you could do it, but to really give people the chance to be able to schedule their own meetings. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that, if you download an app and you have an account, you can have a meeting with multiple people, and there's only what one person pays or that one organization pays, but maybe some of these organizations don't really haven't ever budgeted for that, have always met in person. And so kind of making that opportunity available to people could really make a huge difference in organizing, especially for the next month or two.
Well, if you are part of a congregation, ask your minister, ask your administrator, because chances are you're meeting at Sunday morning right now using a Zoom account. And ask if you can use that Zoom account, borrow it. No, it doesn't cost any extra. And the basic accounts that most ministers are using right now will hold up to 100 people. Some will hold up to 300 people. You can even get a Zoom account free, but it's for 45 minutes only. And then you'd have to sign all back in. Then you have to sign back in again. But you can get a free Zoom account too to talk to people.
The 40-minute limit doesn't apply for just 2 people connecting, but if it's 3 or more,
right,
then you go up to $15 a month for an account. It gets you unlimited time and 100
and 100, right. So there's a number of different ways of doing that one. And if you're part of an organization that doesn't have a Zoom account, talk to the leadership of that organization, because they can get it for just a few months. You don't have to buy the whole year. Buy a few months until we're actually able to do it face-to-face again. It's okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Joan.
I know there were grants and stuff for voter organization. If you were using it for that purpose, if we could facilitate groups to be able to meet among themselves, because like we said, part of it is just people talking to each other. And, if we can help those groups get some ownership just to kind of show them how it's done, they'll take it over, I'm sure.
They can take that over. That's right. That's right. And volunteer to be part of the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. Volunteer through you, Joe, here, because we're going to be working specifically with registration and education. Other parts of the coalition are doing voter suppression and protection work. Others are talking about the National Voter Day of Registration and various other elements. But we're going to be working specifically on education and registration. Any other final comments?
Is that the OVRC nonpartisan?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm in that. I haven't seen a lot of activity.
No, you have not yet, because we didn't have the script yet on how to do this during COVID.
Okay, so you've been creating it. Okay.
Yeah. We're creating that. And make sure you check your own vote tonight. Any other final thoughts before I close out today? Great. Because I want to close with a word from Margaret Wheatley, who said, "People are the solution to the problems that confront us. Technology is not the solution, although you can see it can help. But we are the solution. We, as generous and open-hearted people who want to use our creativity and caring on behalf of other human beings and all life." And with that, I want to thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, Joan. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you.